For on the Catechism, and well, so you guys can walk out. Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, as we get ready to study your teachings that you've handed on to us, keep us open to how we may understand it. Also, help us to grow in faith and understanding it so that we come to an adult faith through Christ our Lord. Amen. So I have a little, what you call it, a disclaimer, right? I mean, or whatever you say it, is that there are going to be some things that I'm sure you probably have never heard of, all right? And some things where you might find out that it's different than what you thought. So all I'm asking you is to keep an open mind, because even though the nuns may have told you that when you were in second grade, you are now no longer in second grade, so you want to try to move to an adult faith. And it's not easy to do that. I'm gonna explain that in a minute in terms of how someone is that on there? No, it's not on there, huh? Okay. So just so that you understand, I'm going to give a little background on the Catechism. I'm going to just open this up. Before I do that, I always do some business items. It's a reminder that if there's snow cancellation, we're still going to keep going. And the reason we're not that we'd have it in person, but I'd go in the studio that we made back there, and everybody goes online. So if you get used to the link, so everybody will be online, and that way you check the website, because it'll have up-to-the-minute information on that for any kind of snow cancellation, because then you'd see that we're not going to get far tonight, and it's going to take a year to get through this catechism, I think, after I started to plan how I was going to present it. So there's the website there, and we usually put it right up there. The other thing is that if you want to get some emails as I get information, sign up on the emails. So that's a flock note, and I want to draw. There we go. So I can draw. So you just fill it in right there. If you fill it in right there, then if I send out a flock note, you'll get it, and you'll have an idea of it, okay? The other thing is the catechisms. There are a lot of different catechisms. They all go by the same paragraph. So this is the one I'm using here. We have some here. These are $30, and then we have some smaller ones that you can see over there. This one here is the latest version. It's the blue version, but you can have the green one, or you can have the tan one. The tan one is the original version. There's only a few changes between that one and that blue one, and that's because the church updated some teachings. One of the most notably one is on capital punishment. So when we get to the capital punishment section, you'll see it's probably, this is where the church updated the information. Okay? So background, just a little background on the Catechism. First is that it was promulgated in 1992. So it was after 6 years of preparation to get the Catechism together. It's the first catechism in 400 years. The Catechism of the Council of Trent was the last catechism where we put together all of the things, and there are 2,865 paragraphs. So if we do about 70 a week, we'll get through them by the time I leave here, all right? Because there's a lot of them. The other thing is there are 4 parts to the catechism, and I like to see them as 4 parts or 4 pillars on which all our faith is held. And these are very important to keep all 4 of them together, because the first part of them is what's called dogma or creed. We're going to go through the creed. I believe in God the Father Almighty. That's in part 1. All right. Part 2 is the way we worship. So that's going to be the sacraments. It's going to go through the 7 sacraments, the way, the liturgy, how the people of God have come to worship God. All right. And celebrate the sacraments and continue the salvation work of Christ on the cross. Third part is the morality part. This is kind of like, well then, how do we behave? Jesus is teaching. There we follow usually Beatitudes and the 10 Commandments. So the Catechism is structured that way, right? And then the last one is how we pray. This is our individual relationship with God in terms of prayer and the intimacy, and it goes through the Our Father. So these 4 pillars, prayer, morality, worship, and belief, creed, all come together in the Catechism to create a book of faith, all right? What happens for many people, faith is usually reduced to just one of the pillars. It's about how you believe, as long as you're a good person. It doesn't matter what you believe, it's as long as you're a good person. Or some people say, well, you don't have to go to worship God. You don't have to put God first, even if you believe in him. And then so they walk out the worship and celebration part of it. And then some people say, it's all just about my own personal prayer. When I can walk out onto the dock and get a connection with the divine. That's really true. You should be able to do that. However, there are other elements, and we'll explain some of that as it goes on. Okay. Now, the other thing that's also very important is this whole way this catechism and the others are set up. And I bring that up with you because you're going to start reading these things and you just got to know that you can find help, because this book is a cross-examination of all these different aspects, because we believe that they all belong together. All right. So you can see that there's going to be on each side of the catechism, there are numbers. These are other paragraphs that the church says, if you want to understand this, go to this paragraph and it will talk about it some more in a different way. So if he's going to talk about something we believe, you might go to the other paragraph and it talks about how we pray using that very same teaching. So what happens is people got very confused. They read that, I don't understand what that means, but they don't look at the little numbers on the side. The church is already trying to help you with that. The other thing is the footnotes, very important as well. The table of subjects are in the back. These are all subjects in terms of the faith, that people want to look something up. The other thing too is the table of abbreviations. I share all that with you because you should know. I want to make sure you understand that, because people say, what does AG mean? Well, look at the back. There's a whole section of abbreviations because it's going to use the same thing, especially when you're getting into the scriptures and they use JER. What is that? We'll look into the table of the index of abbreviations and then the citations. And this is where this catechism that John Paul II promulgated is really, really kind of a special catechism, because it brings in many, many elements. Very much a lot of scripture is found in here. There's a lot of scripture citations. There's ecumenical councils, right? And then there's also pontifical documents. There's church documents. There's canon law that's quoted. There's liturgy. So what we say at Mass is often quoted in there. So you can find it in the footnotes. And then church writers. So the early church writers. And you got, Augustine and all of the other writers that are a part of this. Okay? And it was meant to be the norm for writing local catechisms. And this idea, because this is like a textbook. So we're going to go through it because I want to teach different elements of it. But you can understand that it's going to get pretty technical and, it's not a second grade textbook, right? It's meant to guide publishers and bishops and priests to right teaching. So you should be able to find it. The only thing is that it summarizes a lot of things. And once you study theology, you know why that's there. I want to leave you with it. I want to start with this quote here. I know it's long. It comes from Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis, not a Catholic, but very much a high Anglican that we connect with him. And it's theology that we're going to do. And I want to just read this because I want to understand kind of what are we talking about. He says, now theology is like a map for those who love maps, right? It's like a map. Merely learning and thinking about Christian doctrines, if you stop there, is less real and less exciting than the sort of thing my friend got in the desert. So, we're just going to learn all these things. I mean, you don't even have to believe to learn what's in here, right? But the map is based on the experience of hundreds of people who really were in touch with God, all right? That when you have a map, this is in terms of dogma, they're going to say that this is a accumulation of thousands of years, 4,000 years, of people who have searched for God. That's what we would say is the summary. Experiences compared with any thrills or pious feelings you or I are likely to get on our own are very elementary and very confused. So, hopefully this is what it's going to do, is it's going to give the idea that we have our own little experiences of God. But this map is going to help us, because that can get confusing as to what does this feeling mean? What does this experience mean? Well, let's look at how thousands and thousands and thousands of people have experienced this. He said, and secondly, if you want to get any further, you must use the map, right? You see what happens to a man in a desert may have been real and was certainly exciting, right? So this experience of God, real, exciting, but nothing comes of it. It leads nowhere. There's nothing to do about it. In fact, that's just what a vague religion all about feeling God in nature and so on is so attractive. So what? What does it mean? Who cares? Right? It says it is all thrills and no work, like watching a wave from a beach. But you will not get to Newfoundland by studying the Atlantic that way. And you will not get to eternal life by simply feeling God's presence in flowers or music. Neither will you get anywhere by looking at maps without going to the sea. Right? You got to get to the sea. Nor will you be very safe if you just go to the sea without a map. Does that make sense? So the idea is that, I like the last two lines where it's like, look, you won't get anywhere just looking at maps. You read this, it won't mean anything. If it doesn't do anything for you, if it's not going to translate into you praying better, you understanding the faith better, you interpreting your experiences by what millions of people have also experienced. It says, so you can't just look at this, but he says you can't get very safe if you just go into the spiritual world without a map to guide you through it all. Okay, so I think that's what we want to say when we have this. Does that sound cool? All right. So we're going to start paragraph 1. All right, paragraph 1. 1. So you can all be there. God create. This is the basic belief. And now this is what I'm going to tell you that this part is the most exciting part as far as I'm concerned. This is the real part. To me, this is what changed everything for me, all right, in terms of faith. Not the first book, because it's going to just explain things, but I'm going to go through that quickly. Because what we are going to do before we even talk about what we believe, we are going to talk about tonight how we come to believe. What does it mean to believe? How does the brain come to know something and believe? So let's start with character 1. So chapter 1 starts with God created man freely and out of the goodness. That's a basic statement of faith. God then called man to seek him, to know him, to follow him. And by the way, I'm going to use the word man because it did. And I don't want to kind of just keep going, man and woman, but you know that I mean everybody, right? Man is humanity, all right? And then God calls all mankind together. So there's a sense of gathering everybody together that's divided by sin into one family. And God calls into one family his adopted children through Christ. So the apostles were charged with proclaiming the good news, the gospel, and all those who receive it in paragraph 3 are called to hand it on. So this idea is you learn your faith so that you can hand it on. All right? And the handing on of the faith is called catechesis. Catechesis is the word in this world of educating and instructing people in this faith. And catechesis is for education, especially for the young people, but then it's to build up on paragraph 6, to build up on the church's activities such as missionary preaching, examination of reasoning for belief, the reasons for belief, the experience of Christian living, all of that. In paragraph 7, it's all about building up the outside of the church as well, not just internally. All right, and the renewal of the church includes catechesis. If we're going to have a renewal in the church, we need to know. We need to begin to learn these things. The great fathers of the church did a lot of teaching, and we've kind of stopped that. The council, and number 9, the councils have a great catechetical element. And in the wake of Vatican II, there is a renewed desire for catechesis. All right, and now I'm in paragraph 11. Okay, and I know it's going fast because this part I just want to get through it. This includes the essential fundamental contents of faith. And then 12 is the catechism is intended for bishops and teachers, for those writing religious books, priests, catechists, and is useful for all Christian faithful. So it's saying, of course, it's good for you to read this, obviously. Then paragraphs 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17 are all just part describing how it's together. You know, the creed, the profession of faith. Paragraph 15 is on the sacraments of the faith, then the life of faith, the commands of the 10 Commandments, right conduct, and then prayers in the faith, right? The importance of prayer in the life of believers. And it goes through the Our Father. Okay, so that's just the structure of the catechism. And then the practical directions come after on using the catechism. And I'm just going to skip that because we know kind of what that means. All right. And then I want to go to paragraph 25, because it's talking about adopting the rest of the paragraph, the rest of it. Essential teachings. One cannot think that there's only one way that fits all people. All right. The text, 24. The text needs to be adapted for cultural, age-specific, spiritual maturity, social and ecclesial conditions. So we need to have you have a USCCB, United States Catechism, but then that would be very different for someone who's in a different place. So RCIA, it's a very difficult book for beginners in RCIA, but then so it needs to be adapted. And then paragraph 25, very, very important. This is where we're going to end this. It's it. All this must be directed to love. All must be showing the love of the Lord, and others should find it accessible. That's the important thing of this catechism. And the reason, and it's the same thing with the laws, the canon laws. The object, charity above all else. So learning this is not about banging someone over the head with it, and forcing it down someone's throat, or saying, see, that's what you're supposed to believe, because then obviously we've lost the sense of love that is supposed to be part of this. This is a proposal, as Pope Benedict said. We propose this faith that our people have come to know, and it all springs from love, and it has no other objective but to arrive at love. So anytime you're going to use these words to condemn or to show people how wrong they are, I think you're abusing the use of the catechism. And we get a lot of criticism by that. There's one thing I do want to share, and I love this dialogue. Some of you have already heard it before. It's a little dialogue. It was on Facebook. But this is also true. It's a dialogue between a person and the Catholic Church. I want to do X. The Catholic Church says, you are free to do it. The person says, but you think X is wrong. The Church says, yes. The person says, because you want to control me. And the Catholic Church says, no, you are free. You are free to do what you want. Right? But the person says, but you think X is wrong. The Catholic Church says, yes, but only because I want your ultimate good. This is the whole point. I want your good. Right? But the person says, but I want to do X. And the Church says, you are free to do it. And then this is the line. But I want you to say that X is good. And the Church says, I cannot say that. I can't say it's good. You're free to do it, but I can't say that that's good. And then the person says, why do you hate me? Which I think kind of leads to where we are today, because as we have a discussion and acceptance, we accept people who believe things that are different. Their interpretation oftentimes is, well, they hate you. And it's like, we don't hate you. This is all supposed to be an act of charity, an act of love. To share the faith that Christ has given us. It's not used to start judging people around. And I think that's important, because we're going to learn some faith and say, so you mean that, that's wrong? The first person you judge? Yourself. Period. All right? And that's really part of our faith. So let's hope we do that as you learn more about this. Right? Because even the Catechism, paragraph 25, everything of this is directed to love. That's in the Catechism specifically before it starts talking about anything. Sound cool? We're on the same page? Because there's no question. I mean, I remember teaching a class for freshman religion, and we were teaching about, being married and divorced and living with someone. And so we were just talking about that because it was in the chapter on morality. And this young girl, freshman, raises her hand and says, so are you telling me what my father is doing is wrong? And I said, now look, I am not here to judge your father. Said, I can't wait to go home and tell him, because I don't think she liked his girlfriend who was living in the house. But, and I'm like, look, all I'm doing is sharing the faith with you. All right. You ultimately are free to make your own decisions. I will not answer for you. I will answer for the fact that I shared it with you, but you make your decisions for your life, right? And I think that's very important. So, before the Catechism talks about what we believe, we have to talk about what to believe means. What does it mean to believe? And I think this is really, really important, because I think it sets the stage for a real dialogue with people. Because the process is to search, we're on paragraph 26, to search divine revelation, and then the human being's response in faith. All right? So the desire of God, basic anthropology. Christian anthropology is a class you take in seminary, which studies the understanding of the human being from a Christian point of view. Who are we? What have we come to see about who we are? Right? Basic anthropology, when you study that. So we have, how we're made and how we come to know, how we understand grace as a way to kind of help us in the life. So we believe that the basic desire for God is written in our hearts. The human beings were created by God and created for God. And only God, now notice now, I'm not talking about Jesus yet. We're talking about all of humanity. All of humanity. Only in God will the human being find true happiness and find truth. Okay? And how does it begin to say something like that? How does it have the guts to even say that? Because we're reflecting on our human experience. And this is what we believe, is we believe that the human being is fundamentally a religious being. And how do we make such a statement in the paragraph 28? How do we make a statement that the human being is fundamentally religious? We say because throughout all of time and culture, humanity has given an expression to their question for God. And that's what's important, is the question, I think. Because that's where the search begins. Nobody questions anything. Nobody searches for anything they don't have a question for. And the thing that we have done over and over again, to our detriment and to the faith of our young people, is we've told them you just have to believe it. When they came up with a question, and I think the problem we have had in our faith is that we have a whole generation that have come up with questions, and they've looked to the generation before them, and they get nothing. They get nothing other than, you have to believe it, you're supposed to do it. And just remember, appealing to authority, I've learned it, is the weakest argument. So if you are frustrated and you appeal to because I said so, that's usually the weakest argument and the least convincing argument. So you have to come with an idea. When a mother throws a 9-year-old in front of me and says, he's got a question for you, I want to say, you should be answering a 9-year-old's question, because you are now 35 years old. And if you don't know how to answer a 9-year-old question, then you don't understand it yourself. And how can you hand on something you don't even know? Right? Because that's what faith is. It's the handing on. But that's where we have been, because we haven't studied anything like this. And we are not willing to do the work, as it says, to kind of figure some of this stuff out for ourselves. And so we says that all cultures, every culture you study, has come up with prayers, sacrifices, rituals, meditations. All cultures have that. They may do it differently. They may have different words for it. They may have different things. But it seems like the human being, even when we have found civilizations that we didn't know about, that somehow there is this transcendent thing within us that calls us outside of ourselves into this world, right? And then we need to put words around it. We need to express it. And that expression has been universal for centuries. Now, they may not all take bread and wine, but they're doing something. Even those who mock faith, they still have elements of religion and expressions of religion in what they do. Because that's the human being. The human being, man, is a religious being by nature. Because we are both body and spirit, right? The thing is something different between this and this. Because this isn't alive. And there's something that's added to matter that animates it. Right? And whether it's in lower life forms or the human being who begins to think and to understand that I am here and I exist. And how come I exist? And then that's the question that starts it. And then we realize that there's something greater than myself out there that I don't quite understand really, because I walk in this mystery, but that's the next phase. Okay? So, this is another quote. This is by actually Fulton Sheen. As all men are touched by God's love, so all are also touched by his desire for his intimacy. No one escapes this longing. We are all kings in exile, miserable without the infinite. Those who reject the grace of God have a desire to avoid God, and those who accept it have a desire for God. And I think that's really important to understand that there's this desire, and that if you reject the desire, you often also reject this idea and notion of God. They're connected with that desire. Okay? So that's why we say all religions seem to do the same thing. And to me, this is what changed for me. It's the ability to transcend ourselves, as I mentioned. And what I mean by that is I can think about the past. I can know the future. I can understand, I can hope for a future. I understand that I exist, and I build libraries and I hand on stories. No other creation as we know it, now, every time I bring this up, maybe somewhere in a galaxy far, far away, there is another world where they are doing the same thing, and we'll deal with that if we ever find it. But in my experience here, nothing I know can do what we do, right? I cannot tell you, a dog doesn't tell another dog a story that has a moral implication to it, right? And he doesn't tell him who his great-grandparents are. That's what we do. And only we can do that as we understand. And so there's this desire, and you know what? Every culture we know, have ever known, has always done that. Even when they didn't even know each other's cultures, right? But this is what I want to share with you, what I think is really, when I first read this, it was actually in Gaudium et Spes, which is the Vatican II documents, which I think is just sorely missing. When I bring it up, I feel like people reject it, and one of the reasons. This intimate and vital bond of man to God can be lost, forgotten, overlooked, and rejected, because it's always freedom. Big thing of freedom. But then the church goes on and says, well, what's the cause of these rejections? If you're following me, you're on paragraph 29. He says the causes of this rejection is the revolt against evil in the world. How many people do we know, or young people, say, how can there be a God with so much evil in the world? So we acknowledge that this is one of the causes for people to reject God. We know that. Sometimes people come up with that as if, this is one thing I always tell people, they're like, oh, well, with all the evil, and I'm like, don't you think we thought of that before? Do you think you're the original person, only this generation? I mean, Augustine talked about evil in the world, right? So did Job in the Old Testament talk about why is there evil in the world and how do we understand it. That's not new. The other one is the religious ignorance or indifference. Obviously, right? People don't know, and they don't care. Parents don't care to bring their children in the faith. They have no concept of what to even put a category around it, right? Cares and riches of this world. We know materialism, right? So the wealthier we are, the more self-satisfied we are, the less interested we are in transcending ourselves, and reasons for that. Scandal and bad example on the part of believers. This has been the one to me that is the most detriment. This is the disaster in Christianity, is the terrible example on the part of believers, because parents have been such bad examples. The church, the sexual abuse crisis, these terrible things that we have done that have caused scandal in our lack of behavior, but good behavior, that has caused it, finding it very difficult. And as Vatican II says, I like it the way it says it, where it has made it harder for people to believe when they see such bad examples of Christians. And we know that, right? That's nothing new, but our catechism is teaching that in paragraph 29. We know why people don't believe. There's a current thought that's hostile to religion. We know that too, right? So if you go up into a school, as I mentioned, I think in my homily this morning actually, was that, when I was in college, we read the classics. So we had Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Then we moved all the way over to the modern period. We skipped the entire medieval period, which was all about trying to understand being and God, which is the reaction against the contemporaries, so Sartre and Nietzsche and all of that. But what was interesting is then I went to Catholic University and I got the entire breadth of the philosophy. So we read Nietzsche and we read Sartre and we read these people who were profound atheists who influenced very much contemporary thought as a way to understand who they are and what they what they're believing. And I think that the church, I'll see that in a second. So this idea of studying these people, what I found interesting is that this is University of Southern Maine. University of Southern Maine was hostile, would forbid us to have that conversation. And even the church itself has conversations all the time with atheists, you'll see. The Catechism expects you to do that. And then sinful man, which makes him hide from God and flee from his calling. So we know that some people know they're doing the wrong thing. That's why they've stopped believing in God. They know what they're doing is not right. They've been taught differently. And so what they do is they hide from God just like Adam and Eve hid from God. And when you're doing something wrong, I always say the best thing to do is go to prayer if you're doing something wrong. But I don't want to go to prayer because if I go to prayer, I'll have to confront that maybe I shouldn't be doing this. So I'd rather not go to prayer and have to deal with it, right? So we talk about this call that happens, but we, in our own reflection, recognize that this intimate and vital bond with God, it can be lost and forgotten, overlooked, and rejected. That's part of the freedom that we have. But he says, even if man rejects God, our faith teaches God calls everyone to seek him. So even if you find someone who has rejected God, your first statement is, God's looking for you. At least if you're not going to tell him that because it might make him mad, but at least in your mind, the way you should treat him is God's looking for you. Because you have some infinite part of your being, as St. Augustine says, my heart is restless until it rests in thee, right? But the way I say it is that, and it'll change me, is that there's an infinite part of me that can never be filled. It just goes on forever and ever and ever. Only an infinite God can fill that infinite being within me, all right? And I say that because my own experience, but when you look at someone else in a human being, when you look into their eyes, you see eternity. You see eternity in their eyes because the soul is eternal. The soul goes on forever. It's not material, right? And there's something beyond just this physical. And I think that goes a long way in understanding the dignity of the human person made in the image of God, because in that face, in those eyes, in that soul is a touch of eternity. That's so important, I think, in terms of our relation with each other. But remember that in paragraph 30, it says that the search demands effort of intellect and will, upright heart, as well as being willing to be taught, right, to seek God. And I've been in that situation where I've been with people, they're not even willing. Sometimes the people, they're going through a divorce, or they come to me because they want to talk about, their difficulties. And I used to start and then go nowhere, we know it. And finally I realized I have to ask them, do you want to stay together? And then they realize I don't. Well, then nothing I can do is going to change that. Because one of the things I think that happens too in faith as well, in all decisions, when I was thinking about priesthood and when I was thinking about not getting out of priesthood, or when tempted by the difficult things that are going on in the world and my life, you know that you can get to a point where you can come back. But then there's a point when the heart grows cold. And it doesn't matter anymore. Nothing matters. It doesn't, no one says, no matter what you say, it's gone. That desire is gone. And now I don't even want to. And then, and you've probably been in that situation or many other things. Like, you know what? I don't even want to try to repair this. And I think you can have that same thing in faith, is that you go so far because of things that happened in your life or things you've done, and it's like, you know what? I'm done. I don't want it. And then it's a long journey, because once the fire, you can always kind of flame the fan, fan the flames of faith. But then there are times when it's cold, and no matter how much pumping you do, nothing's going to come back. And I think that you can be in that spot. And if you've never been in that spot in any other way, in that way you've probably been in some other way where you hopefully come to understand. Okay? How's that for a pretty serious topic? All right? So that is just the idea of, that's just the beginning, right? In terms of the basic understanding. But the question of to believe. Now, this is going to get a little technical. You are smart enough to figure this out, so hang in with me, ask questions, but it is really part of our faith. So our faith believes in both reason and faith to come to know God. Reason and revelation, as we say, philosophy. So we say only human beings can come to know anything through reason. One of the things we talk about is reason and faith, and I believe in reason alone, I don't believe in faith. We got to talk. One of the classes you take is what's called epistemology, or how do you come to know anything? How do you know anything? All right, and I'm on paragraph 31 for those who might be looking in the paragraph. Faith has proofs, right, for coming to know God, but not a sense in proofs that are in natural sciences. These are what's called, where natural science observes the observational data, right? You do this data and you repeat it over and over again, and then you hold on to it and it has proof, or you show it, or you have it in a camera, you take a microscope picture of it, so you have observations that are the data. In faith, the idea of proof, which we use the word proof, the same thing, which is evidence, is found in what's called converging and convincing arguments, paragraph 31, that bring about certainty. Okay, that's a very different thing. So, for example, proof is evidence, right? And arguments established for it, or helping to establish a fact. That's what a proof is, right? That's evidence. And evidence is available body of facts and information, right, to decide whether something is valid or invalid. Everybody follow me so far? It's not what's on the screen right now, but I know everybody's reading it because I can watch you all going like this. So, evidence, right? Evidence is what you hang on to, arguments, to establish a fact that you want to hold as true. So evidence is that available body of fact. Now, how does one come to reason with these evidences? Well, there's what's called deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning. That's what we do. So what the church has done is has studied how we come to know. Deductive reasoning is you start with this general idea. Right? So you have this general idea, and you come to a specific conclusion. This is the example. Not on here. I shouldn't have go back to that. Here's how we come to know something. All dogs have ears. Golden retrievers are dogs. Therefore, golden retrievers have ears. Make sense? Right? A is true and B is true, then you're right? Then if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, that kind of thing. So we all know that. You familiar with that, or does that make any of it? Okay, it makes sense, all right? So you deduce something from two facts. If you have an appointment at 10 o'clock, it takes 30 minutes to get there, you conclude that you have to leave at 9:30. That's how I come to know. How do you know something? I know I must leave by 9:30. You deduce that based on these facts. Inductive reasoning, we do this all the time, is something that comes up. Okay, you start from specific premises that are happening, and you form a general conclusion. For example, every time you eat spicy food, you get a stomachache. you might conclude that the spicy food causes stomach aches. Simple, right? Because it seems like every time. Now, it could not, might not. So you make an inference of a general conclusion from particular kinds of instances. And you form this generalization based on how you know observe. So you see that 4 out of 6 people order the same sandwich. And from your observation, you induce that the sandwich is probably a good sandwich because 4 out of 6 buy them. So you reason, I should buy that sandwich. Okay? That's very different, right? Because you may not like the sandwich. All right? So inductive reasoning is that you have a couple of you've got not general but specific situations, and you come to a general conclusion. I always think inductive reasoning is what happens in a court of law, right? You don't see the person killing him, right? Because now you do it because everything's on video. There, now I see it. There's the proof. It's done. But what happens is you use evidence to describe, and you look around for evidence. And if there is enough evidence, you converge them all together and you come to a conclusion, he did it. Now, we know that he may not have done it, but you can come to a reasonable certainty, right? Sometimes even without a doubt, he did it, even though there's a possibility he didn't do it, but you have no doubt now. Hopefully you can see the difference now we're going to talk about in terms of faith, how we come to new faith. So what we have is David studies hard. David is always participates in class discussions. David comes in for help in all his papers. Therefore, I conclude David's a good student. Right? You're hopefully going to feel where this comes, how different that is. If I say 2 plus 2 equals 4, there is no other thing to discuss about it, right? The statement is there. So what we have, and this is going to be, I'm going to share this with you because it's not in there, but it's where it comes from in this converging and convincing arguments found in paragraph 31. And how we come to know God through reason. Okay? Maybe this also is the transition that happens from childhood faith through adolescent faith and adult faith. We used to teach that in the book that we had for religion, and it has nothing to do with age. So take the age out. What you got is someone has a child faith. Child faith is a faith that often you have been told by your parents. You go through an adolescent experience, and adolescence is when everything gets thrown up for question. You begin to question. Does this match my experience? Do I understand what this means? And then you hopefully move to an adult faith where you're able to come to some sort of agreement that this is what I come to believe based on what I think is experience. This is what I've come to believe based on the converging of all the things in my life that I do, that I come to know. The problem is adolescent faith is the dangerous time because without good mentors, without good places to find answers, without good kind of examples of faith, you know where you can go with your adult faith, right? It can go right into another direction, and you probably have children for whom it has done that already because they didn't have the school they went to didn't offer anything. All it did was offer lots of negative stuff. And so they're trying to kind of figure this out. And sometimes what happens, and we have a few people, is they come back, they start a family, they begin to see now. But they didn't have that view at the time. So adolescent faith is that big time of transition and questioning. So notional assent, I'm going to share with you what happened with John Cardinal Newman, and it's very much more complicated, in a book called Grammar of Assent, where in the 19th century, he begins to figure out, how do we come to know? Because what's been happening in the history is that in the Enlightenment, there was a big promotion of reason, and then there was a big skepticism of reason, right? You don't know anything. Nobody can know anything. Does that sound familiar? That's where we are now. Nobody knows anything. There is no truth. That didn't just fall this year. There's a whole study of how we have come to this place where now we don't we don't believe anything is. Notional assent and real assent, he makes these two things. Notional assent being, I told you that God will be with you. And you believe that God will be with you. Say you grow up until you're like 15 years old, and then you're wondering, is God really with me? Because I don't feel God with me. And if this is the way God is with me, then he doesn't know how to be with me. I have to teach him how to be with me, because that's not it. So what happens is notional assents need to get transferred to what is called real assent. That's what he calls it, real assent. How does one come, he says, to real assent to things of God and faith, where it's not observable data that you fall to a conclusion, but it's going to be a converging of many different things. I'll give you an example of that right after. So man, then with this, he uses this thing called illative sense. The illative sense is that process, which means to come to bring in. So you bring in. So firm belief and real assent comes about through that inductive reasoning by my kind of mysterious accumulation of that in my head of probabilities of these lived experiences. I'll give you a couple of things that I mean by that. I'll give you a personal one. So the illative sense is a power in the mind, he says. He comes up with that. The word illative means just to bring in. It's a power in the mind that collects all this information, accumulates it all, connects it all these probabilities to a higher meaning, just like a court case, right? We put them all together. You know, I weigh this one is more important than that one. The fingerprints are on the gun, but you know, this one is more important because someone was an eyewitness, and I used eyewitness over the fact that there were the different handprints on the gun, let's say. So I weigh all of that up in my head in some way, in the human being's mysterious way, comes to a conclusion. And this is where he says it comes to what's called real assent or certitude. Notice the word certitude is what's, I think, in key. Okay? So that's how we collect. So I'm going to give my own personal experience and how I come to see many different experiences. All right? And I can go back, I have to say it for priesthood and how I come to believe. And I have to, admit that I'm always one who's questioning these things. So I don't stand, with you with this, sort of absolute. I stand with you as one who's come to some sort of certitude. All right, because of convincing and converging kind of arguments in my life. Does that make sense? All right, I think that's important because one is that my experience is my family, my grandparents, and their faith. That's certainly part of it, right? But I was a kid who questioned everything. As those who people know me, I always I told my mother one time, I couldn't have been more than 5 because we had the Volkswagen bus. And we had a bus when I was younger because that was before vans. And with 4 kids and a grandmother and a cousin, we had a lot of people, so we had a Volkswagen bus. And I said to my mother, Ma, that's what we called her, Ma. We used to laugh because whenever my brother would come, every kind of the house, the first thing we always yelled was, Ma. That was what we always yelled, Ma. God had to know if my mother was home. That was it. That was the first thing. Well, I'm here. Okay, that's all we need to know. So I asked my mother, Ma, who am I? Right? I don't know who I am. I don't know who's at the end of these hands. I see these hands, but they're mine. Right? And she told me, stop thinking like that. People go crazy thinking like that. And then, that's exactly what she told me. I still remember. And I was 5, and I was like, shut my philosophy career down right away. But I'm going to tell you, I study philosophy. And people go crazy thinking about these things. They really do. Because is this real or is this not? There's some philosophy that's nothing's real. You are all a dream for me. And you're not real. And I mean, it goes on. There's lots of different philosophies, and you lose a sense of reality. Right? And And yet, even though, anyway, we'll get into philosophy class. But my point is that, so that's one, is that I knew I was a question to myself. I also always used to wonder what color was. Now, we know what it is scientifically, right? But I knew that I saw brown. But I always wondered, did everybody see what I saw? Or do they see green? But they've always called green brown, so that's why they say it's brown, but they don't see what I see. Because I can only the one who can see this, right? Those kinds of stupid things I have in my brain, And I was telling you I was only 5, and I was like, then when I was in 6th grade, my grandmother died. Okay, and I was at the foot of the bed, and she had Alzheimer's, and we had cared for her. And I remember that day, I'm at the foot of the bed, and it was the old-fashioned beds for hospital beds that you crank up. And they had this round tube, white tube with those little slats in it. And I'm at the foot of the bed. My whole mother, the family's around. And I said, God, what is happening here? Why are you doing this to her? Why is she dying? Why did she have Alzheimer's? She didn't ask for that. I didn't even ask to live. And I'm going to die. Why are you asking? What are you asking of us? And it started with the questions. That's really key, right? But it was the first time I asked my question to God. Not people told me things, right? So I had an experience there. I have a number of different experiences that I don't want to share with you because the time is kind of growing thin, right? But those plus the experience that I had in seminary. I remember when I went to seminary. Well, first, I was going out with somebody, and I said I have to go see. So I went to seminary, and I have to admit that in my first year of seminary, I was like, this is where I needed to be. Now, I needed to be there because of what I was learning. I'm not sure I quite understood everything about faith and ministry and all that. That came later. But at that point, I needed to know these things. And I got a chance to study philosophy. Got a chance to find, why do I know what I know and how do I know it? And that was very important to me. Okay? Maybe some people could care less. And I found that out very quickly in my friends. Be like, when he says, do you have to do this? Like, I have to. Can't you just have a beer? It'll go away. And I'm like, it's not going to go away from me. It's not going to go away from me. It never has. And even now, and so I was preparing this class, and I have to admit that this section of the Catechism is my section, really, that I love. The rest of it will be a lot of things that we believe and hold, but they don't mean anything until you get this part down, all right? Because these are not dogmas of faith that don't connect in some way with your inner being and figuring out who you are and as a human being. So anyway, my point in that is that I've lost my point. Is that converging? So if I take all of these different things, right, and then even things about the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, and the different experiences I had, and then I was at a funeral one day. It was a priest who had died, and then the homily said this phrase. So I'm talking 25 years ago. So I know I remember, which is another thing. He said, God gave you a memory so that you would remember the flowers in February. And I'm like, I like that. Because I have all these experiences, and when I forget these experiences, I forget who I am and where I'm going and who I'm about. So I have to keep remembering them, right? And call to mind. And then I understand the Eucharist, who calls to mind the suffering, death, and resurrection, because life gets in the way and it changes us and we lose it. And so you remember these things unless you forget them. And I also realize that I'm a man who is romantic. And what I don't mean, well, I'm a, what a romantic guy or whatever you call it, I can give a hug, But anyway, but I'm a romantic in the sense that when I look at things, I see them a certain way. I look at the past, I see them a certain way. and a future. And I have a romantic, an idealism that I have to deal with, as you come to know these things. And so you put all of this stuff together. Somewhere in my psyche, in my brain, in my soul, I come to a certainty of faith. There's a lot more than that, but I can't bore you all tonight with all of those different things. So, and including the things that I have learned, the intellectual stuff and reading Mother Teresa and John Paul II. These people were key figures in my life in psyche, about people who believed in the face of absolute, It's funny how Mother Teresa could believe in God when she's seeing such evil in the streets of Calcutta, of the poor, and why is there such evil in the world? Why are they doing that? And I'm like, how come she can find it, and all these other people who live in plush royal houses can't find it, but then say it's because they're there? And I'm like, and this woman who goes and serves there finds it. How come? And she's not the only one. This is repeated over and over again throughout history. In other words, Mother Teresa is not the first person to serve the poor and believe in God and see the evil that's being done to these poor people and the hungry and the forsaken. And yet over and over and over again, they say, that's where you're going to find God. Amazing, So that's why when we're going to talk about all of these different statements, no one statement is going to say, see, God exists. You have no free choice now, because you have no choice to believe that 2 + 2 = 4. Now you can believe it as much as you want, but you're just stupid, because it's not 3, it's 4, right? And you can believe it's 3 until you're blue in the face, but when you take 2 pencils and you put 2 pencils together, you get the sum of the pencils. Now, whether you want to call it anything else is fine. Those are symbols that we use, right? Because these words are just symbols to point to a reality. So I'm using the words 2 + 2, but it could be umpteen plus umpteen equals the 2 of umpteen, right? That's what I'm doing. I'm just adding them together. You get the sum of the parts. That's the truth. So you can say, no, I don't get the sum of the parts, and maybe in some place you will find out you don't get the sum of the parts. But at least in 2 + 2, it's always equal to 4. So that's why when we start dealing with all of these teachings, right at the beginning, paragraph, 31 says, converging and convincing arguments for certitude. For certitude. So, all right. Now, the way to approach God, we're going to do from reason alone first, which means when we say that, we say there are twofold departure to do it just reason alone. So we are not talking about faith. We are not talking about the articles of faith in Jesus Christ and all of that. We are just talking about connecting with the transcendent, something bigger out there than ourselves. Okay, so this can apply to any religious person, any person who will. Okay, so the way to approach God, we do from the Christian point of view, is through creation, and it has a twofold departures. It says the physical world and the human being. That's the two ways that we can dialogue with people who don't even believe in Jesus, that there is something greater than ourselves, is through reason alone. So what happens is, just to give you a heads up, is that we believe that through reason and revelation. Reason is one thing, revelation is another thing. Reason I use to think things through. Revelation is what God has revealed to us. Example, I can tell you that I believe in a God because of the argument called the prime mover. Everything is in motion. There had to be the unmoved mover. That's a classic. Before Thomas was Aristotle. So a non-Christian came up with this as God is the unmoved mover. Right? All the reason in the world will not lead me to the Trinity. Trinity is a revealed definition, like Jesus is the Son of God. That was revealed to us. You can't reason to that, because what you do is take convincing and converging arguments to come to a conclusion, right? But he told us he's the Son of God, and now we have to deal with that. But that is a statement of revelation versus a statement of reason. Therefore, what we say is that there are things in this world, the thing in the dialogue we can have, where we see proofs for the existence of something greater than ourselves, we call God. That's why the statement, it says, what you think is the unmoved mover, we call God. Notice that, all right? Notice the phrase. I didn't say it is God. We call the unmoved mover God. All right. So in the paragraph 32, they come up with, and there are many more than these, but they call it the movement, becoming, contingency, and order. This is using reason, right? You see order and then beauty. What this is philosophical, so we're in the world of philosophy. Thomas Aquinas wrote 2 books, the Summa Theologica for theologians, and the Summa Contra Gentiles. Summa Contra Gentiles is writing to non-Christians, the Gentiles, the people, not the people of faith. That was theology. And he uses these arguments to talk with people who don't believe in Jesus. Not to convince them to believe in Jesus, but to talk to them about God, a God. And one of the things he says is that observe the universe. The universe is an unmoved, the universe, everything is in motion. That we see that things act on another. So whatever moves is moved by something else. Nothing moves on its own, right? But you cannot go into back into them. At some time, there had to be that which caused the motion, all right? And put things in motion. And that itself cannot have been moved by, it would not have been moved. That's the unmoved mover. Because you would go back into infinity that something's always moving, but sooner or later, because things cause things to move, you'd go back forever. So he says, you see, wherever you go back to where it says, this is the unmoved mover. Okay? The other thing, now, is that going to be convincing to anybody? Probably. But remember, that's not the only thing the church talks about. Then it talks about becoming. So there are things that exist, they come into existence, and they go out of existence. We all have that experience of that, right? We know that there are some things that change from what it was to what it will be. That's the movement. I mean, that kind of change. Nothing can give itself that change, right? It does not have it. The changing thing cannot have now what it will come to have in the future. So remember, this is philosophy now. So if you're lost and like, what the heck is he talking about? All right, I can understand you. I can understand because we studied it and then we had to write it, okay? But point more is to see how the church is working. Because this is paragraph 32, so I'm talking about church teaching. When it says becoming. He says, nothing changes itself. Even the human being needs a will or a desire to change. Right? The universe changes so that there must be something outside the universe that is unchanging that causes things to change. Because nothing, now this is just studying the physical universe. Contingency is another one. Something exists, there must be something that it takes for that thing to exist. So the universe exists. What does it take for the universe to exist cannot within itself be in the universe or bound by the space and time. Therefore, what it takes for the universe to exist must transcend both space and time and be outside of the universe in order for the universe to exist. Because nothing exists without something coming into existence. So you exist, and what it takes for you to exist, air, be dependent on the way, you're dependent on this way. This way is to be contingent. You exist because something else exists right now. And there must be something that exists in itself that does not need anything else to exist conditionally, like we all need. So if I've lost you, I fully understand it because we studied it. But my point is that if you take a look at these The way the church is working, because I'm not going to ask you to figure it out now, but that's when you see the word movement becoming contingency, order, another one. The universe displays a staggering amount of intelligibility. So either this order is a product of change or from being of order. And this is nothing we've ever experienced that was by chance to bring such order. Right? You've seen the laws of physics and the laws of mathematics. And then the same thing with beauty, because beauty is in the universe, and the beauty has such order that it gives evidence of something that causes the beauty in itself, that is beauty itself. So my point in bringing those up is just to show you that the church does think these things through. And it even put it in the Catechism that you can find the reasonableness of an existence of God with your reason. You can approach God with your reason alone. All right? The second one that he goes to, and I know this is, but I just cannot let it go. Paragraph 33, the human person. So, this means more to me personally, because it's my own experience, than the physical world. So, these ideas of the 5 proofs for the existence of God by Thomas Aquinas, which borrowed them from Aristotle, and then, all the other different proofs for the existence of God that they talk about, not proofs like scientific proof, but proof of converging. Okay, but anyway, I don't want to repeat that. But my thing with this is that the church is thinking these things through, and they're part of your statement of belief in paragraph 33. On paragraph 32. 33, the human person. The reason why this is there, because I look into myself, and jump on the second row in Theology of the Body, the human experience of original solitude. I am alone in this world. All right, now you're all around him. But this is what he writes. I am alone in this world in that only I can feel the feelings I feel. Only I can think the thoughts I think. And I can tell you what I think, and I can tell you what I feel, but you can't think my thoughts. You can't feel my feelings. I am alone in this world, trapped in this body, right? So I experience myself, he says, as original solitude. But I also experience myself as transcendent. In other words, I can go beyond myself and out of myself. All right, and so I feel, he says, after original solitude, he calls it like original communion. That there's something within me that desires communion without something outside myself. In other words, I feel incomplete in this. That I desire relationships. I desire a hug, right, and a kiss. And I desire that outside myself. That I can't satisfy all to myself. And I'm not self-satisfied, right? As a matter of fact, they'd say that would kill you if you were alone, right? Children, right? They would die if they didn't have the hugs and the feelings and the stuff. And that's built in our very being. So the human beings has that experience. And to me, I feel that. This is the phrase I would say. I know that because it matches my experience. See what I mean? Okay, so the human being, we decide, is openness to truth and beauty. This sense of moral goodness, freedom, the voice of conscience, the longing for the infinite, for happiness. And this is the next phrase, and I'm going to leave it with this. Okay? Man questions himself about the existence of God. I share that with you because it is not a bad thing to question God's existence. The Catechism says that's what we do. That is part of the human experience. And too often, we don't allow that to happen. And maybe because we're afraid, right? Maybe we're afraid that we won't know the answer. Maybe we're afraid we'll find it to nothingness. I don't know, but hopefully what happens is you Allow the questions to surface within you so that you will go search out the answers. Trust me, you will not come up by now with an original question that nobody's ever thought of before. There's not much under the sun that hasn't happened. I remember Father Paul Plant would tell me, there is no new sin under the sun. Everything that has sinned been done. It's been done. So when they don't want to go to confession, Father's like, look, you're not that unique, right? You sin like all the others, right? And your sins are the same, because that's the human condition that we live with. And so I say that because the questioning is okay. It's very okay. As a matter of fact, it will help to purify your image of God. Because when you pray so hard for your mother to be cured of cancer, and she dies anyway, and God did not give it to you, you have to figure out, what does that mean as a man of faith to continue on, right? Because you're going to teach that. But you have to come. If you ignore that, right, and you're like, but I still believe God always answers my prayers, then, and we have lots of people who do that. But I think what happens in those experiences is that I come to find out what it means to really have faith. That if you can take your experiences and you can wrap them around what it is you have come to believe, it will help purify this belief so that you move out of this adolescent kind of faith into a faith that God gives human beings with intellect to come to know him. And that's the thing that we haven't done in our church for many of us, because we've just come to believe. You just have to believe it. As a matter of fact, sometimes you even trick yourself into believing it because you don't want to test it, because you might find out that you don't have nothing there. And that's a scary place to be. And it is a scary place to be, but if you then believe, and this is where I move, I have hope that it's I don't understand it yet, but I know people who have, and I want to find them so that I can have the faith they have, right? I don't want the faith that those people have, because that's not me, right? And you probably figured that out by now, many things. I want the faith that those people, like John Paul II goes through World War II, right? He's hiding Jews. He's got Jews as friends, and he still believes. How do you still believe? And if you read his writings, it's not whitewashed at all. It's dealing with evil in this world and how does someone work through evil. And that's why I say, well, what about evil in the world? And I look, and we're suffering. And then I come to some conclusions of this myself. When we get to that part, I'm going to say, I don't know suffering. But I do know that I have an incomprehensible God, meaning that there's things I don't know about God. We'll come to that very shortly, next week. I don't know everything about God, right? But I know some things that have been continued to be affirmed, all right? But I do know what suffering does to people, right? And it has the ability to break people, and it has the ability to rise in people. And what's the difference between the two? And when you start looking at that, you're like, oh my goodness, there is something different. But we'll talk about that when we get to evil and suffering in the world. All right? So I've gone 15 minutes over. Let me just finish this one part. It's paragraph 34, 35, and then we're into number 3, which is the knowledge of God according to the church. Okay? It's that we see paragraph 34. Paragraph 35. You know something about the designer by looking at what he created. You cannot know everything about him, but you know something about him. And the last thing I always talk about this is that, look, I don't know who made this TV, but I don't know how many children they have. I don't know how many, how old the person was who created that TV, but I know something about this person. And I know that the person knows something about televisions. I know the person knows something about light and transmission and electricity, but I don't know everything about him. So when we come to God, we're going to know a lot of things about God, but there are a lot of things we don't know about God, right? But I know some things about God, and how am I going to know some things about God? Well, if I believe God created me, I start looking at who I am, and now I'll know something about God. For example, whoever made me knows something about love. I know that much. Because you can't make something you don't know anything about. So this guy or creator or whatever it is you have, knows something about love. And this person knows something about intellect and free will. Because that's what he created, that's what exists. So I'm not talking about who created, because that's an incomprehensible God that is, on a breath. But I know that something about whoever made this, because somebody knows something about this. All right? And that we see in ourselves that we contain neither the first principles or the final end, but we participate in being itself. That's one of the things, is that this is paragraph 34. Remember that when you're talking about God, you are not talking about a being among other beings. And this is what happens all the time, is that they have this image of God, and we'll explain why we do that later on, because of human we do anthropomorphism because we don't have a language, so we use human language to kind of talk about this. But what we're doing is we're talking about a God, right? Using anthropomorphic language, right? But we end up making God a being among beings, right? So that he's like one. Like you say, if God would just come right in here, like God doesn't come right in here. That's a beings come in here. He is being itself. That's okay. He is not a being. He is being. He is existence. He is love. He is truth. He is not someone who tells the truth. That's a being. You see that difference? Okay. So, but we often refer to God because we need to, well, God's there in heaven. We draw him, white beard, right? He's a being. And what am I going to do when I get to heaven and see God? Well, you're going to see it. You're not going to see God. God is being. Right? He is existence. But we can't go far with that language because then we have nothing else to say. So we use anthropomorphic language. And they say when we see that there's a reality that is the first cause, the final cause, that's what we call God. And so we see that man is capable of coming to know God, but to come into a real intimacy with him. God, see, I notice the language, intimacy with him, but because I don't have another word. Like God reveals himself to man and gives him grace. And however the proofs for the existence of God this is the important thing, is we did all those things about reason, the church says, to predispose you that faith itself is not opposed to reason. So when we come to the articles of faith, they are not opposed to reason because you've used reason to get this far. Right? Does that all make sense now? Are you serious? I mean, does it make sense? All right. Okay. All right. So remember now, I'm not telling you I have a lot of adult stories, but just read the Catechism. This is what the Catechism is telling you. This is what your faith says. In the first pages before it even says God, created. I believe in God. That's coming later. This is what comes first. All right. So we do, this was the one thing, but I'm going to leave it there. What did God do? This is salvation history. I won't do it. So glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. So when I saw this, I could not continue. You know what I mean? So, all right, guys online, see you later. Hopefully it makes sense. Send me your ideas. All right.